Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you a recent reads wrap up where I talk about 10 of the books that I've recently read and my thoughts on all of them. I've got a bit of a mishmash of books here, and if you want content warnings, they'll be in the description box down below for you to check out. But without further ado, let's get right down to the books that I've recently read and all of my thoughts on them. To kick us off, I have The Traveling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arikawa. This is a book that has been on my TBR for the longest. When I read it, it was one of my top 10 oldest TBR books, and I did this book such injustice by letting it stay there for so long because I ended up really enjoying this one. This one is following a man and his cat. This is a cat who is a stray cat and he finds abandoned and decides to keep it because it looks like a cat that he used to have. But then after a series of events happen in his life, he unfortunately no longer can keep his cat. So you go with him as he travels to meet different people from his past who he thinks might be able to look after his cat, whether they can or not, and you gradually find out why he can no longer look after his cat, why he has to give his cat away. I really enjoyed this and it did make my heart soft. I'm not an ice queen in the end, and I really liked it. For starters, I do have to disclose that I usually don't love books with cat main characters or points of view because I'm not a big cat lover the way that some people are these days. However, I really loved the cat in this. The cat was so sarcastic and sassy and sounded exactly the way that I imagine a cat would sound if I was in the cat's head. So I actually really liked the cat's point of view, which is a shocker for me and totally something new. But I also really like how it switched between the cat's point of view and the human's point of view, and it is that typical translated fiction, translated Japanese literary fiction, where it's almost like a collection of individual short stories about these characters and what happened in their lives and why they are where they are now and what steps they need to take to become unstuck in their lives in whatever way before you move on to the next person, the next reason why they can't keep the cat, and the next story. That's kind of the cycle that you're going on here, and I liked it. I liked that there was a familiar structure to the narrative that we knew was coming up. Was I as interested in these individual stories? No, I wasn't in the way that I usually am, but because we have such a strong voice in the main character and in the cat, I was happy to be there for the journey. It does not take a mastermind to figure out why this man cannot keep his cat, so even though I think the book was trying to be like, this is a big moment as you discover why he can't keep the cat, for me it wasn't a reveal because I'd figured it out long before we got told, pretty much the beginning of the book. And it was nice. The ending was nice. It was very bittersweet in the way that you can imagine it might be, and I just think it was a really lovely, heartwarming story all the way through. And even though I don't typically read cat books, I would read another cat book by this author. That's how much I liked it. Then I read another Freida McFadden thriller. I read The Inmate. This was a really fun read. This one, it's about this woman who is going to work in a prison because she can't get a job anywhere else. She has a son, she is a single mother, and you find out that the man who tried to kill her in the past is actually an inmate in this prison. So she's going to be the nurse and she might come across him, which of course she will. As well as that, she's moving back to her small town for this job for the very first time, and so she's coming across different people, including other people who were there on the night that her ex-boyfriend tried to kill her. So that is the thriller that we're getting. Now, this book, again, I've said this before with Freida McFadden, it was a page turner. I couldn't stop reading. I kept turning those pages. I kept whizzing through this book because I wanted to know what the big plot twist or plot reveals were going to be. I wanted to know everything. So I was just moseying my way through this book and I raced through it very quickly. Is it believable? No. Okay, no, I just don't think it's believable in the way that it is. It does one of my least favourite things with a twist, which is where things seem to come out of the blue in a way in which you wouldn't be able to predict in the slightest, because there's no hints in the lead up to suggest that maybe this is an option for what happened on the event of the night. I did like how this book was structured. You got a chapter in the past when her ex-boyfriend tried to kill her, and then you've got a chapter in the present. I think that duality worked very well, and the way that the story threads reflected each other in this, very well done, very nice storytelling. Our main character is just the silliest main character ever. I don't think she's got a brain cell in her head. The way she just flip-flopped between what she believed and who she trusted, I was just thinking, you're not really that smart, are you? And she's also got a son who she keeps introducing to the men that she's dating, lickety-split. And I just feel like, from what I see of single parents, is that they're very careful with who they introduce to their children as prospective partners, because you don't want to be like interchanging those people in their lives all the time. So I was just like, what are you doing as a single parent? But also like, what are you doing in life? Girl, she needed to figure some things out. So I was not really a fan of our main character, but not in a way where it stopped me from being able to read the story in her point of view, just in a way where I was like, you need to be a little bit, you know, silly for this plot to work, and I'm fine, I'm here for it. I'm here for the plot over the characterization, so I was happy to just keep reading. I feel like I'm saying things that I didn't like, but I did actually quite enjoy reading this experience because it was just a really fun, easy to go through thriller. It also has a point I don't like, which is where if the main character remembers enough, then the plot can be resolved. Like, if the main character thinks hard enough, then the plot can be resolved. I think that's also a bit of a silly thing, but it was just good fun, you know? Sometimes you read a book and you're like, that was a great experience. Would I recommend this one? Maybe. If you like a good thriller, then you can have a fun with this thriller, but it's not, you know, the next best thing. It's just a good time, a good way to pass the time. I haven't been reading that much non-fiction this year, and I decided it needed to change. So I picked up Things in Nature Merely Grow by Yiyun Li. This is Yiyun Li's memoir and her thoughts and feelings about the fact that she had 2 sons, and both sons have died and passed away, and they died and passed away of their own choice. So that's what I'm going to say in this video, and it's very clear from the beginning that this is what this is about, so please be aware going into this one. It's very heavy on the themes of those kind of thoughts and actions, and also it's really, really heavy on the grief, because imagine being a parent who is grieving for the loss of both of your sons at different times. It's very intense on that fact. Now, this was an okay read to me, and that has nothing to do with the subject matter. I want to be very clear. I think actually the way that Yiyun Li is processing her grief in this is quite unique, because it's not so much focusing on the emotion of grief, but more so thoughts and musings around grief. And you can tell that she has been such a loving mother who tried to do the best that she possibly could by her sons and love them and care for them in the way that they want to be. And she has faced so much commentary and negativity about her parenting and her approach to parenting from the fact that she has had 2 sons who chose to do this. It's not so much the content, because the content is here, but it's just that we are incompatible as a book and a reader, because for starters, this book really is about Yiyun Li's thoughts and feelings on this. There's not much narrative structure. It's not told in a chronological order. It's not saying this is what you can do to get through this grief. It's not even saying this is how I feel about my grief. It's just, here's my thoughts on this topic around grief and this topic around grief, and this is kind of what happened, and this is how I'm feeling now, and let's move on to another topic and I'll tell you what I think about that. And that lack of structure meant I got lost quite a bit in what I was reading, because it was all feelings and nothing to guide me through. And so in terms of the reading experience, that is what made this one not the best for me, and that's pretty much the biggest thing that I can flag about it. I feel like it was almost a diary and a processing system for Yiyun Li herself, and so I almost felt like I was intruding into her thoughts and her private moments by reading this, because it was so unstructured that it felt like something that she was working through and not something that I should have been privy to. That's how I can put it. And so actually reading this in some places made me a little bit uncomfortable, but it did not feel like a fully fleshed, finalized work ready to be shared, but more so something intimate and close. I think this is a kind of book that can be good for somebody in certain stages of their grieving. It just wasn't necessarily one for me. Moving on to a poetry collection I read, and that is Manorism by Yomi Sode, and I read this and I give it 5 stars, and it became a new favorite poetry collection and probably one of my all-time favorite poetry collections. I absolutely loved this and I highly recommend it. It's a Black poetry collection, and it's all about Black trauma and separately also grief, but especially Black grief, and I loved it. I think each and every single one of these poems is top material, 5 stars, no complaints. I don't actually think there's a weak poem in this collection at all. Everything is stellar, everything is superb, every word is intentional, every image is conjured up in my mind perfectly. This particular poetry collection, some of them are just like poems on thoughts and feelings, but a lot of them are actually poems that are connected to situations and occurrences that have happened in real life, whether that has to do with police brutality or racism. And so looking up some of these stories, some of them I knew, some of them I didn't, looking them up and then reading the poems made them hit all the harder. Poetry is not a luxury, Order Lord says, and this poetry collection absolutely stews in that and reeks of that, because it's all about poetry that is so real, things that have really happened, and it's putting those into words so that other people can process the emotions and feelings that Black people collectively and individually feel when we read those stories and when we know that these things could happen to us any day of the week. So I think this is also a poignant and important poetry collection. Towards the end of the poetry collection, I think it's the second to last section, it's an interconnected poem that is split into several parts and chapters, but it's talking about an experience with grief and grieving for the relative of somebody else in a way that is, you know, consumed by Black culture and Black norms when it comes to talking about illness and when it comes to talking about grief. And I think, again, this sounds like it was a very personal experience, but it was also one that felt very familiar, and all of those feelings around the grief in that were really intense, but also just really, really true. If I could describe this poetry collection in one word, it is truth. In 3, stone, hard truth. And yeah, absolutely phenomenal. I can't wait to reread this and get my pens out and underline and highlight and really analyze, because there's a lot of goodness in this. There's a lot of playing with verse and writing, but because of how intentional the author is with all the right words, it's actually quite easy to read and understand as well. So yeah, one that I would recommend for like all levels of poetry readers to be able to get into fairly easily. I read a translated classic, and that was The Obscene Madame D by Hilda Hilst. This is translated from probably Portuguese, because I know this is a Brazilian author, and this is a very abstract novel about a woman who is the obscene Madame D, and she is grieving for her partner, so she takes off all her clothes and locks herself in the cupboard under the wardrobe. So that is what she chooses to do, and this whole novella is being in her mind as she is spiraling emotionally and thinking about desire, sexuality, grief, and life as a big concept. It's quite erotic, and I don't know what to think about this book. I read it a while ago. I still haven't been able to process my thoughts properly. I keep thinking about it, trying to find where I land, and I think I'm settling on okay. I've actually given it so much time before sharing this review because I wanted to have more concrete thoughts, but I don't think this was for me, but the writing style was for me, okay? So the writing style is very stream of consciousness. There's no speech marks whatsoever. You are in the flow of this woman's mind and you are along for the journey, and I was here for it. I felt so consumed by being in her perspective. I felt like I was in that wardrobe with her, in her body too, because she was struggling and those emotions were brought across so well. However, the only thing is, did I have a clue what was going on in this whole book? No, I did not. I had no clue what I was reading about, because she is going off on all these thoughts and tangents. It's impossible to know what's real, what's not, what was the point of her musings, what was I supposed to take away from this book? I do not know, and I could not tell you. So in terms of plot and storyline and characterization, I'm on a 0. I've got nothing to give you. But in terms of writing style, I really, really liked it, and so I'm not quite sure where that means I should end up, but I think it's just an okay read from me. Then we have one that I really liked, and that is The Chance to Fly by Ali Stroker and Stacy Davidowitz. And this is a middle grade novel, like upper middle grade, so think ages 10 to 13, maybe 14, and it's about our main character, I think her name is Nat, yes, Natalie, and she has to move because her family is moving. So they move to a new flat, and she doesn't want to do wheelchair racing anymore. She has a passion, a big passion for theatre, and when she sees that a theatre group is putting on Wicked for the summer, she knows that there's a role for a character in a wheelchair called Nessa Rose, and she's like, finally, a role made for me, and she goes to try out for it. That is what this middle grade novel is all about, and I have to say that I really am just so glad that this book is out there for children. It is written by Ali Stroker, who is a wheelchair user actor herself, so it's all own voices, and all of the disability representation is top tier, amazing, uncomparable, wonderful, would do again. Like, it's amazing representation. It's just so lovely to see a story with a wheelchair user main character where it talks about some of the ableism that she faces and faces from other people, how she is in the stage and age where she wants to gain independence, and how difficult it can be to gain that independence from your parents and hit that puberty stage while you still have to ask for help for so many things because you are disabled too. I know and observe that kind of situation from afar, so it spoke very true to what was happening in this book as well. Please read this if you are a fan of Wicked, because it is so steeped in Wicked, you know, references and lore. If you have not seen the musical, film or book, it does spoil all three, so do be prepared for that. And it also talks a lot and makes a lot of theatre references, which is great for me as a musical lover, but I know that maybe it's too many theatre references for some other people. However, it really worked for me, and it's just full of typical theatre kidness. You know, theatre kids have just a way of being so boisterous and so supportive and so loud and fun, and I really just loved the found family element to this friendship, and how Natalie is so nervous about making new friends and then falls into this wonderful group that softened my heart so much. One of them is queer, one of them is a person of colour, you know, they're all so different from each other but support each other in all the things that they're doing, and it made my heart so warm to read this middle grade and just see so much love in this book. And even though she does have some struggles in her friendships and struggles with her crushes and struggles with her parents, underlying it all you can see that there's so much love there. Like, her parents love her so much and support her so much, as do her friends, so it was just an absolute joy to read this. I do think at times the writing was a little bit clunky, but I don't think the child readers are going to notice. That is very much me as an adult reader reading this. So this was truly a joyful book, and I know there's a sequel as well with my name on it. I read One for All by Lillie Lainoff, and this is a Three Musketeers historical fiction YA retelling. Whew, I feel like that tells you a lot about it already. But I thought it was a Count of Monte Cristo retelling. I also thought this was a historical fantasy book, so it's not a surprise that I found this one just okay, because I picked it up for something that it was not, you know? And this is what it was in the end. I do think that it has a nice plot to it. It's something that I would have loved as a teenager. It's about this group of girls who go to this finishing school. None of them want to be there because they don't want to go to finishing school, they want to be musketeers. And it turns out that when you get to this finishing school, it's actually an undercover finishing school for female musketeers. So that is what this one is actually about, and I thought it was just okay. I read the whole thing, but it was very, very slow paced and very, very, very draggy. It took over 100 pages for us to actually get to the finishing school, and I just didn't care when we got there because by then I was very, very tuned out. It's got a mystery at its core, and the murder mystery is slow going. It's so slow, it's laggy, it takes ages to get anywhere, and when it got there I immediately had predicted everything, and so the outcome was very, very obvious to me. I think the best thing about this is, again, the disability rep. Our main character has some condition that's not named in the actual book itself because it's a historical fiction, and at that point it wouldn't have been named. It's POTS, actually. So the condition that the main character has is POTS, and the representation of POTS in this was really, really well done. I think it's own voices rep, so the author themselves is very passionate about writing this good representation and is the best person to do so. But it also just showed that from a historical fiction perspective, where people don't understand what's going on, where people are like misdiagnosing you, and I really think it handled all of that aspect of a storyline the best. That was the best element to the storyline. I liked the friendship between the girls in the finishing school itself and how they were always supportive of each other. There's the words "one for all" and "we won't let you fall," but those words were repeated way too much. Like, I got the message already, so you don't need to hammer it down. But I don't actually have that much to say about this because I was just reading it and dragging my way through it because it just was not, unfortunately, that good. The next book I read was Orla and the Wild Hunt by Houghton. This is a middle grade fantasy book. It is Irish, so it's set in Ireland, and it's about these two children who are grieving for their mother, and they go and spend the summer with their gran, and their gran is acting kind of suspicious. She's put locks on the door, she's kind of changed her ways quite a bit, and they gradually discover that they are being hunted by the wild hunt in their area, and when their gran is kidnapped by the wild hunt, they will do everything in their power to get her back, and that starts them off on their adventure. This was so much fun. I really had such a blast reading this. I really enjoy the middle grade fantasy genre, and reading this reminded me that I need to keep picking it up because I have such a good time each and every single time. So with this one being set in Ireland, I got a lot of Irish mythology and lore and stories that I just didn't know about before, new Irish magical creatures. There were some that I was familiar with, but the lore around the wild hunt I didn't know. Pukas, I didn't know any of that, so it was really fascinating to discover more of that. And also the book itself includes the actual like songs and some of the mythologies to the stories, so it's kind of fun to see it in that way. And actually it gave me insight into other books I've read that borrow from Irish mythology, and I didn't even notice because I didn't know they were specifically Irish myths before. Actually, I learned a lot while reading this and found it really, you know, playful. As well as that, I really loved the character development in this. Orla is struggling so much with her grief throughout this book, and you can see that she's grieving in the way that a child does, where she doesn't really know how to talk about it, where she doesn't really know how to process it, and so she's actually lashing out at the people around her in the beginning of this book. But through the adventures that she has and learning how much she loves and truly values the people in her life, she starts to be apologetic for the way that she's treating them and is determined to do better by them. And I really love in books where characters have done wrongs, where they take the time to truly apologize and truly try to redeem themselves and prove and show that they can do better. And even though Orla is just a child, she kind of really thinks about her actions, reflects on them, and takes the time to apologize and do better. And all of that storyline around grief and all of that character development is barely noticeable because you're having so much fun with the mythology, adventure and magic and situations with giants and underwater creatures that they get caught up in along the way as well. So I really appreciate that this author managed to balance all these different elements to the story and have fairies and different creatures, and yet still tackle such an important subject in a way that feels very approachable and understanding to children, while also showing such good character development, developing amazing secondary characters, and making my heart swell and warm by the end of the story. Actually, this was just a really phenomenally done book stylistically, and was so fun that I can recommend it to loads of children. Plus, it's a middle grade fantasy standalone, and I think it's just so rare to find these as like standalone, so it makes me happy whenever I come across one. Up next we have a novel in verse, and that's called Wild East by Ashley-Hickson Lovence. I'll have the finished cover here. This is a novel in verse about Ronnie, who is this young black teenage boy, and he ends up in the wrong place at the wrong time in East London, and after a series of events happen that really put things in perspective for his mother decides they are moving to Norwich, which he sees as the middle of nowhere, and he has to kind of like start again and try and move past what's happened to him. And while he's in class, he starts to slowly fall in love with poetry through some workshops that they have going on, and it opens a whole new world to him that he never saw before. I found this novel in verse to be just okay. I liked it, but I didn't love it. I think it's because it was lacking a sense of direction to me. I do think it's about, you know, coming of age and moving to somewhere else, but I just wanted a little bit more of a plot line thread through this for me to follow while reading. That said, I do think it was a really nice story. I absolutely love when I see, you know, characters fall in love with a hobby or something that really means a lot to them and they're passionate about, and it's really joyful to watch somebody fall in love with poetry and reading and writing and creating it, because I too am someone who reads and writes and loves poetry, hence why I'm reading a novel in verse. So it's nice to see that reflected in the story, and the author actually references other novels in verse and other really fantastic poets, so it's kind of nice for young adults to be able to see that and get more recommendations from reading this one in particular. I do think Ronnie's story felt very real about that like danger and anxiety of being a black teenager, where you could just end up in the wrong place at the wrong time and everything falls apart. Quite emotional, but at the same time while lots of microaggressions are happening to Ronnie, our main character, and while there are a lot of racist occurrences and some which are quite serious, I still feel like we didn't quite get the emotional depth from our main character that I wanted. It was like these things were happening to him, but he didn't really take as much time to process and think them through as I think this book should have shown for the degree to which these events were happening. So I think I could have done with a bit more depth, but it was still quite nice to read, and it was nice to see there's also a queer friend who slowly has a coming out journey, and that's a lovely side story to follow as well. But yeah, it was just an okay read. I wanted more from the storyline. I wanted a bit more emotional depth to this, but it's still nice enough to have out there. I didn't comment on the poetry itself in this, and I do think it's one of those novels in verse where there are some poetical elements to it, but it's not as poetical as it potentially could be as an in-verse story. And ironically, I didn't like any of the poetry that the main character actually writes that's within the novel in verse, which just felt a bit ironic while reading. But yeah, it was a fine read. And we're going to end on another book that I just felt was completely fine as well, and that is Giant by Mollie Ray. So this is a wordless graphic novel, so it's all entirely illustrations, which are black and white, and it's about these creatures, and one of them in the family discovers that they are ill, and it's a life-threatening illness. This is what the blurb tells me, and I would have got it from the graphic novel itself, but I wouldn't necessarily have gotten anything else. By reading this, I realised I do need some words in my graphic novel because I was often left a bit floundered and confused by what was happening in this. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that all of the family members look like this, and I know that the illustrator and author did, you know, put glasses on the dad and a scarf on the mum, but when it came to the siblings, I just could not tell them apart. And if the mum wasn't wearing the scarf, you know, I just couldn't tell that that was the mum. And so I was a bit lost on like who was who at certain points. And while there were things happening, like they were doing actions, and I was like, what is this supposed to be? What are they doing? What do they mean here? What am I supposed to get from this? So there were lots of points where I was just like, this is going over my head. But then there were some panels which were just so clearly showing an emotion around having a terminal illness or being around someone with a terminal illness, where you can feel that kind of like anguish and secondary suffering and wanting to support them and be there for them. Those emotions were brought across with some of the panels, so it's not even necessarily that the artwork is bad per se, it's just that I was lost without words, and even having, you know, a couple of words here and there could have change the game for this one with me. I liked the artwork, I just didn't entirely always understand it. I know that this is based on the author's real experience with someone in their family suffering from a life-threatening illness, so take that with the review as well. But yeah, I just felt okay about this graphic novel. And there you have it. Those are 10 books that I've recently read and all of my thoughts on them. Please let me know in the comments section down below, what was the last book you read that was an interesting media format, whether it was like a novel in verse, or there were emails and letters included, or it was a graphic novel with lots of illustrations. Let me know. I'd love to hear about it in the comment section down below. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!